At points in this video, it may seem like I don't like the Batman, or Matt Reeves, or anything like that. That is not the case. I loved the Batman. Still do. Don't know how they did not get a cinematography Oscar nomination. I mean, come on, Academy, what are we doing here? But it is specifically because I love the Batman that one part of the movie bugs me. I've wanted to make a video about it for a while, and now that we've got a second between Marvel releases, I am going to explain, as best I can, why I think the Batman ruins the Riddler. So I talk about the 3-act structure a lot, especially when I used to do the rewrites. It's a framework used to organize and understand stories. It applies to literature, theater, video games, all kinds of narrative storytelling, but it is especially useful for understanding film. Most movies, not all, but most, have 3 acts. The first act sets up our conflict and our characters. The second follows our characters as they grow and attempt to address the conflict. And in the third act, they address the conflict. There are all kinds of little milestones along the way. There are 2 plot points where the characters make a choice they can't come back from. There is a midpoint where something fundamental changes, a low point at the end of Act 2, and a ticking clock in Act 3 that results in the climax. So let's look at the Batman, see how it fits into this structure. And again, I don't think that it's completely necessary. Plenty of stories do not follow this structure, but most do. And understanding how a story deviates from that structure can help explain why some parts of it might not feel right. Act 1, super simple. We meet Batman, we meet the Riddler. Riddler commits his first crime, and Batman reacts to that crime. He attempts to solve it, and that's the end of Act 1. Act 2 is split into 2 parts, separated by a midpoint. Part 1, pretty simple. Batman follows leads, meets Selina, attempts to figure out what's going on at the Iceberg Lounge. Then the midpoint. This is a little tricky. I think you could make the case that the midpoint here is Coulson's death. It's the first time Batman comes face to face with a big villain, the first Riddler crime that Batman is directly involved in, big moment in the narrative, and Batman loses. Coulson dies, Batman gets caught in the explosion, and from that point on, things get much worse. And after that, Batman becomes more proactive. He works with Gordon to catch Penguin, who he believes is El Rata Alada. The rest of Act 2 is kicking Batman. Penguin is not the rat. Alfred is bombed. Riddler dumps the info on Thomas Wade and Carmine Falcone. Then Bruce goes to Falcone, who tells Bruce that yes, his father had the reporter killed, and as a result, Maroni killed his father. Also, the renewal project his father set up was used as a slush fund for corrupt Gotham actors. Everything Bruce has known is a lie. In screenwriting, this is known as the Dark Night of the Soul. I know, adorable. The emotional low point of the movie. Obi-Wan dies on the Death Star, Luke gets sad about it. This is just like that. Everything goes wrong for Bruce and he's forced to reevaluate his way of thinking about things. His father was a complicated man. Alfred is family. Bruce cries and grows. He also has the realization that comes with the end of Act 2. Selina finds the recording from Annika where Falcone kills Annika because she knows the truth. Falcone is the rat. He controls the drugs in Gotham. The city works for Falcone. And hey, look, all of our plots have merged. Bruce's relationship with his parents? Falcone. Who killed Annika? Falcone. Who's controlling the crooked cops? Falcone. Who is the Riddler after? Falcone. We are in the end game now. 1 hour and 57 minutes in, Act 3. We have a ticking clock. Selina is going to kill Falcone. Bruce needs to get to Falcone, save him, and expose his crimes. And we have our real big bad, Falcone, who Batman met at the midpoint. Yeah, you thought the villain was Riddler. I mean, he kind of is, but the real villain of this story is Falcone. So Selina goes to kill Falcone. We get a bunch of big fights, this hallway scene, which is one of the cooler moments in the movie. Selina tries to kill Falcone. Bruce stops Selina and arrests Falcone, and that is the emotional climax of the movie. Bruce is forced to spare the person who killed his father and ruined his legacy because justice is right and vengeance is wrong. There's your lesson, and all of our main characters are involved. Bruce, Selina, Gordon, Penguin, and Riddler in spirit. The good guys win. And then bang, Riddler kills Falcone, gets arrested, goes to jail. Batman and Riddler have their first face-to-face meeting. Riddler says he won. Batman says he didn't. There's some falling action. And that is the end of Act 3. A perfectly structured movie, claps hands, goes home. And not only that, this ending solidifies the Batman's status as a neo-noir film. Neo-noir just means it's reminiscent of the film noir genre. And while you may not have seen many original film noir movies from like the 50s, you're probably familiar with other neo-noir movies like Blade Runner 2049, Drive, Memento, and Nightcrawler. Typically, the genre focuses on stories about lonely anti-heroes, usually detectives, unraveling a dark web of conspiracies and intrigue. The morality is murky, the allies, frequently beautiful women, have deep dark secrets, there's lots of murder. Overall, the vibe is not great. There are also many visual and auditory noir signifiers. You've got lots of darkness, shadow, plenty of rain, Dutch angles, and narration. The genre may be best known for its moody first-person narration that sets the stage for the film. It's what every parody seems to have the most fun with. The Whose Line Is It Anyway game, Film Noir, was all about the narration. Remember that? That was fun. Anyway, it's easy to see how the Batman checks a lot of these boxes. Bruce is a detective, obsessed with cleaning up the streets of Gotham, who gets pulled into a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top. He questions his own sanity, is forced to ally with Catwoman, and cooperate with the Penguin. Gotham is dark and dreary and covered in rain. The camera is askew, off-center, and sometimes even upside down. And moody narration bookends the story. It's classic neo-noir. And with the climax in Act 3 where Riddler shoots Falcone and tells Batman that he actually won, that's a very noir ending. Frequently, the bad guy is able to get away with it. In a noir story, the corrupt system, or the real villain, gets one over on the detective, and that shakes the detective's perception of the world. Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. The perfect noir ending. Don't go chasing waterfalls, you can't beat the system, sometimes the bad guys get away. So a movie where Batman arrests Falcone and saves Selina, but the Riddler gets the last laugh and kills Falcone is a perfect neo-noir ending. Batman sort of won, but the villain got what he wanted, and the city was changed by it. The corruption is weeded out, but instead of a hopeful ending, everything's complicated. Will the city be better off with Falcone dead? Is this what Bruce actually wanted? And the big one, is Batman helping or is he making things worse? An even more perfect ending. Claps hands again, Justin Hammer dance. Except there is another act in this movie, a second third act. And while I appreciate the interesting things that the fourth act did, I think people realize that the movie kind of already ended. It's like if you went out to a restaurant, had a delicious 3-course meal, great appetizer, entree, and a tasty dessert. You were all done. And then the chef comes out with another dessert, one that in my opinion is not as good as the first. Riddler explains to Batman that he actually wanted to get captured, and there is another far more catastrophic plan that, to Riddler's disappointment, Batman has not yet discovered. Batman investigates Riddler's apartment, finds a secret map using the original murder weapon, and at that very moment, a series of vans explode that destroys the Gotham seawall and flood the city. Riddler watches this and he's psyched. The flood forces people to the Gotham Square Garden, or whatever it is, which is also the site of Mayor-elect Bella Real's victory party. But little do they know that some Riddler followers will be waiting for them. You see, Riddler organized about 20 like-minded individuals. They all got Riddler costumes and somehow snuck into the rafters of the garden. Don't worry about it, campaign events are usually pretty chill when it comes to sneaking around with a big gun. Batman arrives in time to stop the Riddler goons with the help of Catwoman and James Gordon, and then sacrifices himself to save some people in the arena from getting electrocuted. But he's okay and leads everyone to safety. Then, in one last bit of narration, we learn that Gotham is now a National Guard level disaster, and Batman is a symbol of hope. Also, we see the Joker for a second, motorcycles, movie over. And here's the thing, I did not like this little extra ending, this fourth act, and I want to explain why. But first, I'll give this movie, which again, I quite like, some credit. Here are some good things about the fourth act. I think there were a few things that work in the fourth act. Things that are not present in the first three, like the Tucker, and the idea that there was one clue Batman missed is some solid Riddlering, although Batman does miss one of Riddler's clues when he brings Falcone into the light, only for Riddler to shoot Falcone, so that does happen already. Also, the idea of Batman baptizing himself in the stadium waters to save everyone is interesting. I don't think it necessarily belongs in this movie, but it's a cool bit. The moment where Batman uses green to make himself rage on the Riddler goon, good. Bizarre that they just threw that in there without any explanation, but cool. The action is fun, the score of this ending is fantastic. In my opinion, it just is not worth sacrificing everything interesting about the Riddler. But you may say, well, actually there was a good reason why we needed that second ending. Batman, in his dealings with the thug, learns that violence is not a good thing. Batman has hope that the good people outnumber the bad, and in that case, the justice system is the only way to deal with criminals. This idea, the difference between justice and vengeance, is one of the more interesting ideas the movie presents. Why is Riddler wrong and Batman right? And this all comes together in this moment where our hero sees what vengeance can do to a person. He recognizes it in the criminal's eyes, and he can see there needs to be another way. Oh, you thought I meant that moment? No, I meant this moment, when Bruce convinces Selina to spare Falcone so he can face justice. Selina articulates the argument for vengeance, he has to pay, to which Bruce responds, you don't have to pay with him. Vengeance takes a part of you, part of your humanity. And Selina can't lose that. She can't sink to Falcone's level. She needs to be better. So even if you believe the fourth act is necessary, because it shows Bruce that vengeance is not the way, I would argue that the movie already did that with the Selina-Falcone interaction. And this confrontation with Falcone is much more personal for Bruce. Falcone is the man who might have gotten Bruce's parents killed. Bruce choosing to spare him and bring him to the police is the hardest choice Bruce can make, justice over vengeance. So for me, the I'm vengeance moment in the finale is redundant. Bruce has already learned this lesson. Hell, he already had that We're Not So Different You and I conversation with Riddler. So the idea that a criminal thinks he's doing the same thing as Batman and that shocks Batman shouldn't come as that much of a surprise 10 minutes after the Riddler conversation. So I find myself asking, why did the movie have a fourth act? What do they gain? After all, the movie was already on the long side. If The Batman ends with the confrontation between Batman and Riddler at Arkham, we're looking at 2 hours and 18 minutes. Tack on the ending where Bruce says goodbye to Selina and some credits, and the movie is almost 2.5 hours long. And movies are not cheap, and tickets don't scale. A ticket to a movie that's an hour and a half long usually costs as much as one that's 3 hours long. And that shorter movie can screen more times in a day, so it has the potential to earn way more money. And assuming all other things are equal, a shorter movie is cheaper to film because there's just less of it. So in a year where Warner Brothers was canceling movies that were already made to pinch pennies, why release a movie this long if it does not need to be? I have two guesses. The first is a comic thing, the second is a movie thing. Let's start with the comic one. It certainly seems like Warner Brothers or Matt Reeves or whoever wants to do a No Man's Land. If you're not familiar, in the late 90s, Batman Comics ran an event called Cataclysm, in which Gotham was hit by a huge earthquake. The Bat family tried to contain the chaos that followed, but it was too great, and eventually, the US government declared Gotham City a no man's land. Anyone who stayed was on their own. The criminals took over, it was a disaster. And you can see the seeds of no man's land being planted in the first 3 acts of The Batman. Riddler is destroying the traditional power structures. New, more comic booky villains like the Penguin are taking over. It's gonna be a slow burn, but it's coming. But then in the 4th act, the city floods, the National Guard is sent to Gotham, and they declare martial law. So we are doing no man's land now, which would be great if it didn't happen so often. You have seen this story before. It plays out in The Dark Knight Rises and slightly less in Batman Begins. It's also the basis for Arkham City and kind of Arkham Knight. It's also the 2nd season of the Harley Quinn show. Batman media loves to do a no man's land. I imagine it's partially because it gives you an excuse to let the Bat villains run wild. The gangs take over and fight for control of the city. It's very Warriors, and Warriors is fun. It's also the easiest way to escalate a Batman story. It's basically Batman's Skybeam, the big cinematic catastrophe. But man, can this movie not wait to do a no man's land. And in my eyes, that's one of the biggest reasons why we got here so quickly. Look at what Matt Reeves has done so far. Cloverfield and the Planet of the Apes trilogy. See a pattern? Matt Reeves seems to love stories where a cataclysm destroys civilization and characters are forced to adapt. New societies are formed, and no Batman story is more like that than No Man's Land. I gave my pitch for The Batman sequel in my video, and that's what I would do, but I would bet you anything that what Reeves wants to do is make The Batman No Man's Land. I mean, hell, if you want to do dueling criminal factions, you already have some. Riddler and Joker can team up. Penguin has his own organization that'll probably be expanded upon in his show. You throw in one more, maybe Bane or Scarecrow, and you've got a perfect villain triangle that Batman needs to deal with. So I definitely think part of why the movie ends this way has to do with the fact that Matt Reeves loves a good societal collapse/rebirth. But that's not the only reason. And to understand why, we need to look to Marvel. Forget Malekith, forget Caecilius, forget Hayward, forget all of them, because there is no doubt in my mind that the worst Marvel villains in the history of Marvel villains are the Flag Smashers. Don't get me wrong, acting was fine, costumes were fine, and their fight scenes were fine, but it is the perfect example of a villain with a sympathetic and reasonable motivation who goes cruel for no reason other than to turn the audience against them. And yes, the show does do some work at the finale with Sam bringing their message to the GRC representatives and asking them to do better, but really if the Flag Smashers just steal vaccines and food, there is no question they're the good guys. But at the end of episode 3, for absolutely no reason, Carly, a character that has been careful to avoid violence where she can, blows up a building full of innocent people. When asked why, Carly says vengeance is the only thing these people understand. And I would believe that if in an earlier episode, Walker and the GRC did something extreme. Like, sure, they killed a flag smasher, but even the flag smasher they killed seemed to understand that this was the price of doing business. It would make sense if Carly was reacting to an escalation because she had no other choice. Something like what happens at the end of episode 4, when John kills the flag smasher. Things escalate, makes sense. But ideologically, I do not see a path from Carly does not kill innocents to Carly callously blows up a building full of GRC workers. It even shocks her flag smasher teammate, which means it's such a surprising turn that even the people closest to Carly did not see it coming. And it serves one specific function. It makes things easier for people to understand. Walker's crusade against the flag smashers is now justified, like a certain someone else. Now, I do not want to be one of those people, and I definitely do not support assassinating political leaders. I know, a very brave stance. But I find it difficult to argue with the fact that the Riddler, like the flag smashers, was kind of right. He saw a corrupt system made up of mob bosses, chiefs of police, district attorneys, and mayors. He determined that the system was incapable of reform. The corruption was structural. You could not change things without drastic action. Now, you could make the case that the upcoming mayoral election could change some of those things. Bella Real had a similar anti-corruption message and seemed to be gaining on Mayor Mitchell in the polls. But I think Riddler would argue that the corrupt system would not allow her to make the changes she hoped for. They could potentially fix the election using their connections. There's even a good chance they could have her killed before the election like they might have with Thomas Wayne. There is no guarantee reform would work the way Real wanted. This is not to say it's not without trying, but the only forces in this movie working to make big political change in Gotham are Riddler and Real. And I think there's a possibility Real's change never comes if Riddler does not expose the corrupt Gotham politicians. Now you may be saying, sure, Riddler is well within the right if he exposes the Gotham politicians, but killing him, that's perhaps a bit too far. And I would agree. Again, killing politicians is wrong, so brave. But the Riddler is making the case that the system is so corrupt that exposing the corruption on its own is not enough. He believes there is no change if the politicians in power are able to control the machine. Could they bury stories? Could they evade prosecution? And without what he believes is a credible threat of violence, does D.A. Coulson confess? Maybe not. So here we are. The Riddler is a villain with a lot going on and a plan that perhaps people may see as sympathetic. He kills the people he believes to be responsible, albeit with some casualties along the way and a fair amount of destruction. But he gets what he believes the city needs. The web of corruption is swept away. But then the movie keeps going. And I don't think I would be as bothered by the fourth act if I felt like it was the logical endpoint for his character. Like, hey, it's more movie, but sometimes that's not so bad. But I would argue that almost everything the Riddler does in the fourth act is antithetical to everything he has done so far. And sure, villains can be complex webs of contradictions, that's fine, but in a situation like this where the villain has behaved pretty consistently throughout the first 3 acts and then shifts gears completely, there's usually a reason. Something changes. The villain is forced to adapt or put into a position where he compromises his strict morality to demonstrate some sort of facade. But this plan has been in place since the beginning. At no point does the plan change. It can't. Everything needs to go exactly as it has so far. So does Riddler design the first 3 quarters of his plan with a simple set of goals and methods, and then the last quarter is, for no reason, completely different? Now, I'm not trying to CinemaSins this thing or nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking. But real quick, not to nitpick, is this the first Batman movie where Batman does not throw a batarang? I only bring this up because there's that moment at the end where Batman needs to cut the faraway cable, and he has that emblem that he's used so far as a knife. And I think, oh, this is where he invents the batarang. And I'm not saying he needed to. What they did makes sense. It's just interesting that this Batman has pretty much everything else figured out except Batman's signature weapon. I'm not trying to poke holes in the logic of the movie to prove that it's bad. I want to examine the Riddler's decision. Riddler's hard pivot, because it takes what is a pretty ideologically consistent villain and undermines them at the end for no reason. And that's weird, right? Because this movie is good. So Riddler's plan throughout the first 3 acts, simple. He has a list of Gotham movers and shakers that are responsible for corrupting the renewal program, turning it from a charitable fund aimed at helping the poor to a slush fund for Gotham's underworld. Riddler is going to go through the big names on the list, prove their guilt, murder them, and then publicize their crimes. This will serve the dual purpose of convincing the public that these guys are bad, and also scaring other criminals trying to do the same thing. His actions are targeted, precise. He devises a carefully constructed trap, one specific to each person. Some involve kidnapping, surveillance, contraptions, and even torture. Riddler also manipulates the Batman and the GCPD into helping him execute his agenda by sending Batman messages. While his attacks do put innocents in harm's way, the target is always a corrupt Gothamite. There's one specific person Riddler is aiming to make an example of, someone that he's determined is guilty, and Riddler is correct. The first 3 targets were all involved in the renewal program and Gotham corruption at a high level. Riddler's attack on Bruce Wayne is supposed to act as a proxy for an attack on Thomas Wayne, since Riddler believes Bruce has inherited Thomas's sins, which pretty flawed reasoning, but I see what he's going for. But then, for his finale, Riddler goes completely off script. Up until now, he's been working alone, unless you count the Batman. His targets have been specific, and his goal has been to weed out the corruption that destroyed Gotham. But in the finale, Riddler is now apparently organizing a group of like-minded extremists online. He tells them to bring their guns to a political rally and indiscriminately shoot attendees. A rally, to be clear, for a candidate that also wants to reform Gotham. Sure, she's more political non-murder reform, but still, same side. But hell, maybe she's not extreme enough. Sure. The problem is, Riddler is also going to flood the city using a series of bombs planted around Gotham's seawall, and that flooding will force people into the garden, the same location where the rally is being held. So even if the people at the rally deserve this, like Riddler believes Falcone and the other corrupt Gothamites did, this building will be full of just people. Sure, this is the rich part of town, but that doesn't mean only rich people are allowed to go there. So we go from Lone Wolf targeting specific corrupt individuals with carefully constructed death traps to extremist leader executing an arbitrary group of people using a nearly random method. So why this shift? Well, The Batman was an unusually complicated Batman movie. The first one I can think of that really interrogates the concept of Batman and comes up with a new conclusion. Other Batman movies have tried this. The Burton movies explored how becoming a vigilante causes Bruce and Selina to lose their humanity. The Schumacher movies focused on the toll living a double life takes on Bruce Wayne, the businessman, the boyfriend, and the father. The Nolan movies played with the concept of escalation. If Batman continues to exist, does that invite conflict? Without Batman, do characters like the Joker or Scarecrow or Bane come out of the shadows to wreak havoc? And the Snyder movies ask questions about how Batman is unable to process loss and cannot help but hyperfixate on power as a coping mechanism. The Batman took all of these ideas and mashed them together. Has Bruce lost his humanity? Can Bruce Wayne and Batman both exist? Does the Batman's mere presence invite villains like Riddler to take the law into their own hands? And are vengeance and violence acceptable ways for Bruce to deal with his perceived lack of family? And I would say the first 3 acts have answers to those questions. Being Batman does have a negative effect on Bruce's humanity. The further into the Riddler case he goes, the more obsessed he becomes, and the more he pushes characters like Alfred away. He doesn't sleep, doesn't socialize, he doesn't have a real life. And Bruce's Batmaning definitively did inspire the Riddler to take action. In a world without Batman, there would be no Riddler. Not in the way that he exists in the Batman. Riddler even believes he and the Batman are working together. And he isn't completely wrong. Batman is a part of his plan. Another piece on the board that can be manipulated. And vengeance is not an acceptable way of dealing with Bruce's loss. By the end of the 3rd act, Bruce's philosophy has shifted. Vengeance is selfish and self-destructive. Justice, while less satisfying in the moment, is healthier. So you could argue that the Batman believes being Batman is negatively affecting Bruce's life, the presence of Batman is making Gotham more dangerous, and his original Batman goal, vengeance, is only making all of that worse. In other words, the first 3 acts of the Batman make a pretty strong case against the Batman. And this is what I find so fascinating about this movie. The first 3 acts are a real deconstruction of the character using classic noir principles. And the 3rd act ends with an uncertain Bruce. He really doesn't know if the Riddler beat him, and if Batman staying out of all of this would have stopped it altogether. Would the Riddler just be another loner with an axe to grind, but no one to show him how to swing it? And I fundamentally do not think Warner Brothers would let that movie exist. They would not let anyone make a movie about how Batman might be a mistake in the same way that Disney won't let Marvel make a movie where the villain makes meaningful change. It is not in their interest. Now, I'm not saying I believe they came in and changed Matt Reeves' script or anything like that. I have no evidence to back that up. But why would a company like Warner Brothers take their most profitable character, besides Black Adam of course, and make a movie that ends with the main character saying, hey, maybe I'm the problem? That is not going to sell toys or greenlight sequels. It would be like making a sequel to Nightcrawler or Memento. So I think intentionally or unintentionally, The Batman gave us the easy way out. The fourth act sets everything where it should be at the end of a big superhero movie. Bruce makes a big sacrifice, sets an example, and saves the city. The Batman is unambiguously a force for good, and that's why I so dislike the fourth act. It takes the most interesting thing the Batman is doing and dismisses it in favor of a safer, simpler ending. And the part that kills me is that this could have worked. Say you wanted the Riddler of the first 3 acts, and also a big exciting action finale where Batman fights a bunch of goons at Gotham Square Garden. I believe this ending could have been the logical endpoint of that story if Riddler did not do it. The whole movie is about Batman's effect on the city. He's feared by the criminals. The cops don't trust him. Is he making things worse? Should there be a Batman? And Riddler is doing roughly the same thing as Batman. He's using his detective skills to learn who's responsible for all of Gotham's troubles and taking action. The specific action both they're taking is their biggest difference. Justice, vengeance, that's the movie. And one of the biggest differences between those approaches is that justice follows rules, the law. It needs to be controlled. Whereas vengeance is chaotic, there are no rules, and every single person understands vengeance their own way. Batman's justice is clear. The bad people face the legal system. But Riddler's vengeance? Where does it end? When is it enough? Can it be satisfied? So why not have the movie address that? I think it would be a far more interesting movie if at the end of Act 3, Batman and Riddler are talking in prison and then boom, the vans explode, starting the flood, and Riddler is confused. He didn't do this, his plan was over, his vengeance was done. But perhaps Riddler had some unintended consequences. Maybe some other disaffected young men saw his example and decided to take matters into their own hands. They made a plan to flood the city and shoot everyone at the rally. And now this strange fourth act makes sense. It feels weird because the movie should be over, but that's not how vengeance works. It never ends, and it keeps creating Riddlers. And Batman needs to show these guys another way, or it will never end. But not because Riddler set this in motion on purpose, because he did it accidentally and cannot control it. But enough about Batman. Let's talk about Superman, because as you know, James Gunn is working on a new Superman movie called Superman Legacy. So, I have made an entire video fan casting the Man of Steel himself. I look at so many actors, and in the end, I do arrive on one who I genuinely believe would make the best Superman. And that video will be on YouTube eventually, but you can watch it right now on Nebula. You know the story about Nebula. It is a creator-owned subscription streaming service that I helped create. Your favorite creators, my YouTube friends are all there. You've got Patrick Willems, Scott from NerdSync, Hello Future Me, Captain Midnight, so many great creators. And there's all kinds of stuff you're only going to find on Nebula. All my videos go up there ad-free and early. Nebula is always one Nando V Movies video ahead. There's also Nebula Classes, which is now just part of Nebula, so you can watch my class on turning your fandom into a career, or Patrick's on making a movie, and there are Nebula originals like Abigail Thorne from PhilosophyTube made an entire play called The Prince, which was put up in London, and you can watch it now on Nebula. And if you sign up for Nebula using the link below, you can get Nebula for a little over $2.50 a month. It is now the best way to support the channel and Nebula. So go check it out. Thank you to everybody who continues to support the channel on Patreon. Thank you to everybody who listens to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking. Everybody who watches these videos on Nebula, and everybody who follows me on Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, all that stuff. I'm Nando V Movies on all of those platforms. That's it. Stay safe. See you next time.